مرحبا مشاهدينا في هذه المقابلة الخاصة التي نجريها هنا في وارسو مع وزير الخارجية البولندي رادك شيكورسكي. Thank you, Minister, for having us here in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As we come from the Middle East, it's very important for us to understand the Poland's perspective on the ongoing conflict in our region. So how do you follow the developments there?
Well, we of course follow it with great concern. People are dying. There is politics behind it, obviously. We've appealed for our own citizens to leave the region. We will be sending some humanitarian assistance. And Poland tries to be helpful and sympathetic. We recognize Israel's right to exist within secure borders, but we also fully recognize the statehood of Palestine. We have a fully accredited Palestinian ambassador here in Warsaw. We hope that that suffering may be limited.
Moving to Ukrainian context, Poland's stance has been firm and clear from the beginning. Your narrative asserts that if Russia prevails in Ukraine, Poland will be the next country under attack. Do you have the same concern, the same fears now that Ukraine has taken over Russian territory, in particular Kursk?
Well, the UN General Assembly voted to condemn Russia as an aggressor against Ukraine. Once you are a victim of aggression, you are allowed to defend yourself also on the territory of the aggressor. If you want to appeal for peace, this temporary occupation by Ukraine of Russian land gives you the perfect opportunity to appeal to both countries to withdraw to the international line. But the alternative is some people who call for peace actually mean that Russia should win and Ukraine should capitulate. And that's not my idea of peace.
Warsaw government has fully supported Kiev. What are your thoughts now that we have a decline in military support, especially US blocking Ukraine's use of British missiles?
That's a different issue. The US has just told Ukraine that the package voted by Congress will be contracted till the end of the year. So the supplies will continue into next year. And also that the US will be making investments into the Ukrainian defense sector. There are some spare capacities. Ukraine herself can make more howitzers, more UAVs, more sea drones if they have the money to buy the components. And I believe that we in Europe should do the same. We are spending more actually than the United States on helping Ukraine. It's thanks to our money that pensions and salaries are paid in Ukraine. We could also place orders in the Ukrainian defense sector for Ukraine to have equipment and also for us to have some of it.
How prepared is Poland if Russia carries out its nuclear threats?
Well, when the Russians threaten us, we trust them because they've done it many times in the last 500 years. Russian nuclear-capable missiles stationed in the Kaliningrad Oblast have the range to reach 4 EU capitals: Vilnius, Riga, Warsaw, and Berlin. And Russia threatens us with nuclear weapons all the time, which is not what a permanent member of the UN should be doing. But they have their project to rebuild the Russian empire. It's an illegitimate project. It must not be allowed to succeed.
There is a narrative being promoted by the Eastern Bloc that the era of unipolar has ended. What's your opinion?
Well, these are academic theories. The real unipolar moment was at the end of the Second World War, when the United States accounted for 50% of global GDP. That is long gone. The distribution of demography and economic power is much more equal around the world than it used to be. But the relationship between Europe and the United States is still the biggest area of cross-investment and of respect for rules, rule of law and democracy in the world. So we still think we have something to offer.
What's the impact of the rise of the authoritarian regimes on the global democratic climate?
Well, at the end of the Cold War, if you remember, there was a widespread assumption that the democratic model proved correct, and the number of democracies was rising in the 1990s. There was even a moment of global solidarity. Remember when Saddam Hussein grabbed Kuwait? There was a huge international coalition that chased him out of Kuwait and restored the sovereignty of Kuwait. Unfortunately, that has fragmented.
How is Poland's relationship with Moscow's allies, like Iran and China?
Well, I was just in New York at the UN General Assembly, and I had bilateral talks with both the foreign ministers of China and of Iran. We have diplomatic relations, and we have a dialogue also with countries that we disagree with. We condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but we still have a Russian embassy here, and we still have an ambassador in Moscow.
As a former member of European Parliament, what's the Polish government's vision on the issues such as expansion, the EU?
We support enlargement. We benefited from enlargement 20 years ago, but candidates have to be very well prepared. We have to be sure that there will be stable democracies and that they will observe the rules of the single market. At the moment, the country that seems to be ahead of the curve is Moldova, but Western Balkans have been waiting for a while. And of course, for Ukraine, it's very difficult to do it in conditions of martial law and in conditions of a defensive war.
Are there any objections, Polish objections, to Ukraine joining NATO?
We are in favor in general, but security guarantees do their work when they are credible, when they are backed by force. So when Germany was a member of NATO during the Cold War, and Germany itself was divided, there were 300,000 American troops in West Germany. Because it's no good just to issue a guarantee. The job of the guarantee is to convince a potential aggressor that it's not worth attacking. Is to prevent war. You see, we believe that strength deters, weakness encourages.
I would like to discuss the issues of refugees in this segment. Over 2 million Ukrainian refugees are currently residing here in Poland, which has taken the greatest number.
We think about a million. 2 million originally came, and then some have moved further west.
Okay.
So we think we have about 1 million refugees.
But how has this impacted the labor market, education and health systems, and also the integration programs?
It's not easy, because on the one hand, of course, the refugees who are mostly women and children, and a very large proportion of them are at work. So in that sense, they're contributing to the Polish economy. We don't pay social security payments to refugees. The only thing we pay is $200 per month per child if the child is at school. Other than that, refugees are at work. But of course, we didn't have a 10% reserve in our National Health Service or in our National Educational Service in anticipation of our public suddenly growing by 10%. So inevitably there are some local difficulties. But fortunately, you see, we received the Ukrainian war refugees all over Poland. So they spread themselves quite evenly in Poland because we received them into our homes. So I had 10 Ukrainians in my home for the first several weeks of the war.
I know your people treat the refugees with great humanity, but I mean the other countries, the other EU countries, are they doing enough to match the scale of this crisis?
Other countries actually are sometimes more generous with sometimes perverse effects. So in Germany, under their judgments of the Constitutional Court, refugees receive social payments. I understand about 530 euros per month plus rent. And there is a fine judgment to make whether some of these, say, men, say, of draft age, should be given a financial incentive to be outside of Ukraine rather than be back in Ukraine fighting for their country. I believe Ukraine needs all of its warriors back home. The Ukrainian government also wants refugees to come back, to restore the tax base. So we will not do anything to force people, but we should structure the economic incentives in such a way that Ukraine can sustain the fight.
I want to explain to our Arab audience who may be distant from the issue related to refugees coming from Belarus. Poland is very careful with the refugees coming from Belarus. What's the cause of this?
Well, what we have on the Polish-Belarus border is different from what we have in the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean, it's people smugglers, it's gangs, it's mainly economic migrants trying to get to Europe. On the Polish-Belarusian border, it's a form of hybrid warfare waged by Russia and Belarus against Poland and the EU. Remember, in the European Union, we have the so-called Schengen zone. Once you've crossed the EU border, there are no more passports, visas. We can travel all over Europe without passports. But for that system to work, the external perimeter has to be controlled. And so what Moscow is doing, it is literally recruiting people in Iraq, in Syria, all over Africa, giving them Russian visas, bringing them to Moscow, then sending them overland to Minsk, and the Belarusian border guards push these unfortunate people physically across the Polish border. And that is completely unacceptable. That's a form of weaponizing migration and of waging war by one state, or two states in this case, against a group of states, us, the Schengen zone, the European Union. And we just can't let that happen. So we've had to build a physical barrier. We've created a no-go zone so that smugglers from our side can't pick up these people. And there are violent incidents. We have the Belarusian border guards on tape instructing aggressive young men how to hit Polish border guards with a knife at the end of a stick. And one of our soldiers was actually killed that way. And we just cannot tolerate that.
Is Poland working on its integration programs, or it's a transit country for refugees?
Poland is both a transit country and a destination country because the Polish economy is doing very well. We have one of the highest growth rates in Europe. Our wages are now comparable with the wages, average wages in the European Union. And our economy actually needs people to work. But we think we have the right to say what kind of migrants we want, in which professions, from which countries, for how long do they come, and how to make them productive residents or in future possibly citizens. I understand you will be seeing the Interior Ministry. They are the responsible ministry for migration policy. We are working on a strategy of migration that will set the policy, we hope, for some years. We are also very keen to attract students from abroad. We have already 100,000 at our medical academies, music academies, engineering, computing, and all that. But we want real students for real studies. We don't want fake students to use a student visa just to find employment. You see, we're in favor, but it has to be properly regulated.
What's the biggest threat Poland might face concerning refugees?
Look, I'm a former refugee myself. I became a refugee in the 1980s in Britain when martial law was declared here. And I'm a refugee who has come back to his home country. And the British seem to think that, that means I'm also a link with Britain. Well, and I don't deny it, and I'm eternally grateful to Britain. So, I would be the first person to say that refugees can make a contribution. But numbers matter. And there are numbers that can be absorbed and integrated, and there are numbers that are overwhelming. And one of the attributes of a sovereign state is to control who comes in and who doesn't.
I arrived from Dubai. Many flights coming to Poland daily. Poland is a very popular destination for Arabs. What about the relations between the Polish government and the Gulf area, especially UAE?
Well, I just saw in New York my colleague and an old friend, His Highness Sheikh Abdullah. It's not only Arab tourists coming to Poland. They seem to like mountain areas and Zakopane and so on. But I've done it many times privately, changing planes in Dubai, on the way to India, on the way to the Far East, and looking at the attractive sites in UAE, your wonderful Louvre Museum in this wonderful building, the new
Future Museum also.
The Museum of the Three Religions, the mosque, the synagogue, the church, Burj Khalifa, where I went on top with my sons. So you have the sun in the winter when we need it, and we have the rain when you have too much sun.
Interesting. During one of his interviews, the Polish president expressed his desire to attract more investment from Gulf area. What are the opportunities actually, and how do you describe the climate, the investment climate here?
Poland is open for business. We are a secure member of the European Union, so you have the same business rules as in any other EU country, but you still have some opportunities here. So, for example, our property market is not yet as hot as in some other capitals. It's rising rapidly, opportunities there. We are still completing the modernization of our infrastructure, the throughput in our ports. You have this famous port authority. Our ports are rising in tonnage rapidly. We have a major thoroughfare for rail traffic between the European Union and China. The fastest way to get components and goods between China and Europe is only 10 days by rail through Poland. We're still building our roads. Our economy is growing rapidly, and I just hope your investors recognize the opportunities.
A lot of Arabs might know Poland because of a very famous football player, Lewandowski.
Sure.
So are there any plans or initiatives to share the awesome culture with the Arab countries?
Well, we welcome you in Poland. As you said, there are connecting flights. I see no barriers, and there is recently more and more interest, and a synergy. You have some of the things that we don't, and vice versa. So I think we're made for each other.
There is a Polish saying: "A Pole becomes wise after a harsh experience." Would you say that Poland has recovered from a communist experience?
And you have a saying in Arabic, tie your camel and then Allah will protect him too. So yes, we have learned that we need to invest in our defense. We are now spending 4.3% of our GDP on defense. UAE is also a serious military power in its region. So this is another area where we see eye to eye that, we also have a saying, if you want another one in Polish, that every country has an army, either your own or a foreign one. Your own, in the longer run, is cheaper.
Thank you so much, Minister Sikorski, for this interview.
Thank you.
شكرا مشاهدينا على المتابعة وإلى اللقاء.